Who was William Shakespeare? When we hear the name, we imagine a genius, the poet of poets, the man whose words shaped the English language and gave us timeless stories like Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and Macbeth. But when we peel back the layers, the actual man, William Shakespeare of Stratford upon Avon, looks strangely ordinary. Born in 1564, he was the son of a glovemaker. Not royalty, not a nobleman, not a university-educated scholar. He grew up in a small market town, married young, and had 3 children. By all accounts, he was a practical man, not a prodigy. His neighbors remembered him not as a literary giant, but as a businessman, someone who bought land, invested in property, and sued people who owed him money. And that's where the mystery begins. How did this ordinary man, with no record of formal education past grammar school, suddenly become the greatest playwright of all time? Think about it. Shakespeare wrote with an intimate knowledge of law, politics, court etiquette, philosophy, and foreign languages. His plays reference Italian cities in incredible detail, even though there's no evidence he ever traveled outside England. His writing showed mastery of subjects far beyond what a small-town grammar school could teach. Here's the strange part. Historians can't find a single manuscript written in his hand. Not one letter, not one draft of a play. All we have are 6 shaky signatures, each spelled differently. So who was this man, really? A genius hiding behind an unremarkable life? Or just a convenient name on the title page? The Shakespeare we know is 2 people at once. One is the flesh and blood man of Stratford, living a normal life. The other is a towering literary legend whose words shaped the modern world. But were they truly the same person? This is the puzzle that has obsessed scholars, writers, and conspiracy theorists for centuries. Some call it the greatest literary mystery of all time. Because if the man from Stratford wasn't the real Shakespeare, then who was? Before we dive into the suspects, we need to understand how the doubts even began. Why would anyone question Shakespeare's authorship in the first place? Why would anyone question whether William Shakespeare actually wrote his plays? On the surface, it sounds ridiculous. His name is printed on the plays. His contemporaries, like Ben Jonson, even praised him in writing. But when you look closer, cracks begin to appear. The first seeds of doubt were planted in the 18th and 19th centuries. Scholars noticed how little we actually know about Shakespeare's life. Unlike other great writers of the time, there were no letters, no notebooks, no private reflections. Nothing to prove he had the education or the experiences that matched the depth of his plays. Here's the big sticking point, his background. Shakespeare was not born into wealth or nobility. He never attended university. Yet his works are filled with aristocratic concerns, royal succession, courtly intrigue, detailed legal battles, even intimate knowledge of falconry and foreign courts. How could a common man from a small English town know all this? Even Mark Twain, the legendary American writer, was suspicious. In his essay, Is Shakespeare Dead?, Twain openly mocked the idea that an untraveled country boy could write masterpieces filled with knowledge of Italy, France, and the royal courts of Europe. Twain wasn't alone. Sigmund Freud, Charlie Chaplin, and countless professors have raised eyebrows at the mystery. Then there's the silence. For a man who supposedly lived in London at the height of his fame, there are almost no personal accounts. No letters between Shakespeare and his actors. No notes about his creative process. The greatest writer in the English language seems to have left behind nothing. This silence fuels what's called the authorship question. It asks, was Shakespeare just a frontman? A name used to protect the identity of the true author, perhaps someone of higher social standing, who couldn't risk being associated with the theater. Remember, in Elizabethan England, the theater was not respected. It was rowdy, noisy, even scandalous. Nobles weren't supposed to be writing for the public stage. So if an aristocrat or scholar was writing the plays, they may have needed a mask. And William Shakespeare of Stratford, a convenient, ordinary man, could have been that mask. Of course, not everyone agrees. Many scholars argue that Shakespeare's genius was imagination. He didn't need to travel to Italy. He read books, and turned them into gold. He didn't need noble birth. He had talent and empathy, which let him write from any perspective. Still, the doubts remain. And where there are doubts, there are theories. If Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare, then who was? If Shakespeare didn't write the plays, then who did? Over the centuries, several names have been put forward, each with their own loyal supporters and intriguing evidence. First, Sir Francis Bacon. Bacon was a philosopher, scientist, and statesman. Brilliant, educated, and deeply connected to England's political world. Supporters of the Baconian theory argue that the plays hide layers of philosophy and secret codes that only Bacon could have written. Some even believe the plays were a disguise for his political ideas, too dangerous to publish openly under his own name. To them, Shakespeare was merely a cover. Then, Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. The Oxfordian theory is one of the most popular today. De Vere was a nobleman, a known poet, and a patron of the arts. He traveled across Europe, including Italy, which perfectly explains the play's intimate knowledge of Italian cities. He moved in royal circles, giving him insight into courtly intrigue. His education and experience check every box. The problem? De Vere died in 1604, but many Shakespeare plays were published after that. Oxfordians argue those works were written earlier and only released later. Next, Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe was Shakespeare's contemporary, a rising star playwright whose works were already dazzling London before Shakespeare's name appeared. But in 1593, Marlowe died suddenly in a tavern brawl. Or did he? Some theorists believe Marlowe faked his death to escape political enemies and continued writing under Shakespeare's name. This would explain why Shakespeare's career exploded just after Marlowe's supposed death. And then Mary Sidney, a lesser-known but fascinating candidate. Mary Sidney, Countess of Pembroke, was one of the most educated women of her time. She was fluent in multiple languages, well-versed in politics, and part of a literary family. Some argue she had both the skill and the motive to write, but as a woman, she could never have claimed authorship in a male-dominated society. Each candidate has strengths. Each fills in the gaps left by Shakespeare or Stratford. But here's the truth. No contender has definitive proof. We have speculation, circumstantial evidence, and tantalizing coincidences, but not the smoking gun. Still, the sheer number of theories tells us something important. The mystery is powerful. People can't resist the idea that the plays hide a secret, that behind the mask of Shakespeare lies a genius history has overlooked. But what does the evidence actually say? Are we chasing shadows, or is there real reason to doubt? Now comes the real clash, the hard evidence. What do we actually know about Shakespeare, and does it prove or disprove his authorship? Let's start with the basics. We have records of William Shakespeare living in Stratford-upon-Avon. His baptism, his marriage, the birth of his children, and his death in 1616, all well documented. We also have business dealings, property purchases, and even tax records. He was real. He lived. He thrived financially. But here's the strange part. None of those records mention writing. Not a single line about poetry or plays. They paint him as a businessman, not a literary genius. What about manuscripts? This is where things get even murkier. Not a single original draft of any Shakespeare play has survived. All we have are printed editions, some released during his lifetime, others after his death. And while his name appears on many of them, skeptics argue that names could be added for convenience, not accuracy. Now, supporters of Shakespeare counter with a powerful argument. His contemporaries did recognize him as a writer. Fellow playwright Ben Jonson praised Shakespeare directly in the first folio of 1623, calling him the sweet swan of Avon. That seems pretty clear. Jonson knew Shakespeare personally. Would he lie in print? But skeptics point out, the first folio was published 7 years after Shakespeare's death. Could have been part of a cover-up to maintain the illusion? Then there are the signatures, just 6 of them, all written differently, all shaky, and none attached to a manuscript. To some, this suggests Shakespeare was barely literate. To others, It's just the reality of how signatures looked back then. And what about education? The Stratford Grammar School did provide a solid foundation in Latin, literature, and rhetoric. Defenders argue that this, combined with Shakespeare's genius, was enough. Skeptics remain unconvinced. They say it doesn't explain his deep knowledge of law, medicine, and aristocratic life. So where does the evidence leave us? On one side, we have tradition, contemporary testimony, and centuries of scholarship defending Shakespeare as the true author. On the other, we have gaps, silences, and coincidences that refuse to go away. Here's the truth. No document has ever been found that undeniably proves someone else wrote the plays. But no document has ever shown Shakespeare's hand in writing them either. It's a stalemate, a puzzle locked in history. And maybe that's the point. The mystery itself keeps Shakespeare alive in our imagination. But why does it matter? Why do people care so much about who wrote the plays? You might wonder, why does it even matter who wrote the plays? If the words are beautiful, if the stories move us, why should we care whose hand held the pen? The answer is bigger than Shakespeare. This debate isn't just about plays. It's about identity. It's about who gets remembered as a genius and who gets erased. If Shakespeare of Stratford really was the author, then his story is miraculous, proof that brilliance can rise from anywhere, that the son of a glove maker can outshine kings and nobles. It inspires us to believe that greatness isn't born of privilege, but of imagination. But if someone else wrote the plays, a nobleman like Edward de Vere or a brilliant woman like Mary Sidney, that changes everything. It means history may have buried the true voice behind layers of class, gender, and secrecy. It forces us to ask, how many other geniuses were lost because society refused to see them? That's why the question still matters. Because the answer shapes how we see art, talent, and human potential. And there's something else. The mystery keeps the plays alive. Every generation rediscovers them not just as literature, but as a riddle. We don't just watch Hamlet or Othello. We wonder about the mind that created them. Was it a businessman from Stratford? A brilliant noble? A hidden poetess? A ghostwriter who never stepped into the spotlight? Maybe the truth will never be known. Maybe the evidence is gone forever. But in a way, that uncertainty is what makes the works immortal. Because while the author remains a mystery, the plays themselves are undeniable. They have crossed centuries, cultures, and continents. They have been performed in every language, in every style, for every kind of audience. And that, perhaps, is the final answer. Whether Shakespeare was Shakespeare or not, the words survived. The stories endured. The genius, whoever it was, lives on every time we speak those lines. So the next time you hear someone quote, "to be or not to be," remember, those words come not just from a character, not just from a play, but from the greatest mystery in literary history. And maybe that mystery is the real magic.